So I'm Mark Gibbs with the Great Outdoors Nursery in Austin, Texas. And we want to thank you if you come back to see us again. And if you haven't and this is your first time, welcome aboard. So today we're going to be talking about orchids, and we're going to cover quite a bit of ground here. So hopefully you'll get some questions answered if you're new to orchids, and if not, maybe you'll pick up a new tip along the way. So one of the big things we look at with orchids are when does it need to be repotted? Well, here you can see all of the bulbs, the flares on this guy have really filled it out. And it is definitely telling us it wants to be repotted. We've also got a bloom spike that's finished. And when these spikes finish, they're going to start pulling the nutrition back down to the bulb. So you're going to let this brown out. Every once in a while, we'll be able to cut it at this node, this first node up, just above that node. And if it doesn't continue to brown out and that stays green, you may get a little cheater bulb spike in the fall. This is producing a fall spike off of another bulb. And the other cool thing with orchids is they will only produce a new bloom off of a new bulb. An existing bulb, if it's already bloomed, it's not going to bloom again. So we want to see that regeneration cycle. That's telling you that the plant is propagating and carrying its life cycle on. Secondarily, you want to use the right medium. There are lots of different blends for orchids out there. This is an orchid blend that's got some bark. It's got some large chunks of perlite, and then it's also got some lava rock in it. So there's three types of amendment in here, all very porous. You notice that likability there. And we've had it in here for about 30 to 45 minutes, just getting it nice and saturated. So when these guys land, these roots land down in there, they're going to feel like they're already at home. They grow on bark on trees in nature. So this is just a way to tell them that they're home, they're safe, and they can start expanding. The other thing, last big key thing, is a pot with pores. Porous pots, whether it's terracotta, whether it's glazed, it just needs to have pores. The pores allow for that air to go through that root system, keep the bark evaporating evenly, and the vermiculite, everything evaporating evenly, and allow for that wind flow just to make it think it's still on a tree branch somewhere. So what we want to do is when we take this guy out, I'm going to squeeze the size of the pot here. And oh my goodness, now this is definitely telling us he is ready to find a new home. Look at that. That is just outrageous. Boy, oh boy, this is going to be a little experiment here. So now we've talked about, getting roots that are going to girdle out of the way. One of the things you're going to find when you get the orchids from any of the mass producers, they ship them in a moss instead of in bark. And that moss will actually get fungusy and gross over time. The pot is a plastic pot with one little hole in it. It can't breathe. These guys are used to breathing. So you need to transplant that guy out as soon as possible. You can see how much moss is in here that I'm peeling out. We want to get rid of that moss. We don't need that moss in there. And we want to peel these guys out. You think I'm probably being very brutal, but these roots are tough. Orchids are actually very, very tough plants. We tend to think they're very dainty. But the reason they're expensive is because it takes a long time to grow them to get a flower cycle going and to keep them in cycle. So that's what you're paying for, is the length of time they spend on the table and how long that bloom lasts. When you get a spike that you have a flower that's going to last 3 months, there's not many flowers that are going to give you a flower that goes for 3 months and lives indoors. So find an eastern window. They're going to be happier there. You can see I've pretty much gone all the way up the sides to the top of this root ball. I didn't want to go in with shears and do this because the way this moss is in here, it's actually letting us get quite a bit of that separated. And again, you probably think I'm being really brutal, but I have seen orchids roll around in plastic bags on a floorboard, go into a pot 3 weeks later, and 6 months later they were in bloom. So that's an experience I had in my mom's car on a trip one time. So if you think they're dainty, just give them a try. They are much, much hardier than you think. So we've got him really opened up nicely. We're going to take some of our bark, sprinkle a nice little handful down in here. I want the plateau of these bulbs to be about level with the top of the pot. I really don't want it sitting down in the pot. These bulbs like to be up in the air and be getting plenty of air around the crown. So we're going to check our plateau here. That's pretty low. I'm going to keep adding some bark in here. That's really, really low for this guy. We want to get him way, way up here. And the way you can help get this locked in, shake it real good. Get that bark to lock up on its own. This is one of those things where it's not going to do you any good to try to pack it. It just needs to lock up on its own. We're going to put in another nice little handful. And actually one more handful. The nice thing about this taller pot is that we're going to get a lot of root expansion down. And you can see I've got quite a these roots going out. The joy is on some of the larger varieties where the roots are a little larger, you can pull them through these holes here as you're sprinkling bark in. These are, Oncidiums have a fairly fine root system. I'm going to keep a few at the surface. And then another good trick you can do with orchids, instead of planting it centered in the pot, which we tend to think that everything has to be in the middle, orchids do like to be tucked up against the side. It's going to give it stability, and it's also already going to give it a direction to start producing new bulbs. This mama bulb over here on this back side, she's already been trying to push those bulbs out another way. So we're going to make sure she's nice and tight in this corner. And then as new bulbs come on or new spikes come on, you're going to have some stability because they do get very top heavy and they can flop over easily. So giving them that little bit of extra room to anchor to is really, really nice. So now I'm just literally going to sprinkle this down in. And notice I'm not jamming it down in there and packing it. I'm going to give it another good shake. And I'm just going to keep adding and sprinkling. Another good shake. I got a little bit of space here on the back side. I'm just going to drop some of these smaller chips and vermiculite and lava rock down in there. And you can see we've got these tubers, these bulbs, just about even with the lip of the pot on the top. That's going to make a big difference in keeping that airflow, keeping that from rotting at the top surface, because we don't want that buried when you come to water it. Now, speaking of watering, this is going to want to be put down into an empty basin, you know, a bucket, a mixing bowl, something like that that's sealed. And you'll set it down in there. And then you're going to fill that basin up with water. If you have a large measuring cup, use a large measuring cup. You're going to fill that basin up with water until it comes above the pores. That water, you'll watch that water level and see if it starts dropping. That's going to tell you how thirsty it is. That water is going to surround all of this bark, get into every side of the bark and the vermiculite and the lava rock, and let it saturate really well. You may leave it in there 10 minutes, 20 minutes. If you see it dropping fairly fast, that's telling you that you did get a full dry out cycle, which is nice. We want that aeration to be complete. We don't ever, if we put it in there and we see that it's not drinking anything, then we're too early. We're keeping it too wet. You want it to go through that dry out, just so the interior of this crown gets a good breath of fresh air. It's very, very important for those to get that. And then once you see your water level drop, if it stops dropping after 15 minutes, then you know she's completely saturated. What you can do at that point is when you take your orchid out, pour that water back in your measuring cup. It's going to tell you literally how thirsty it was, and that'll kind of give you a gauge down the road, whether you waited 10 days before your cycle or 7 days. That's going to give you a good gauge of how thirsty it should be. Or again, if you're doing it too soon and it's not drinking, you'll know immediately, oh gosh, I need to wait a few more days. Eastern window, good ventilation, so we're getting nice, good airflow all around this guy. And then, as I mentioned before, you know, the right plant or the right soil for the right plants. Cadillac soil, Cadillac plant. And this smells good. It's yummy. I mean, literally, if I could eat it, I would. I know this is going to love it. And if you want to do a fertilizer, you fertilize during the dormant spell. So that's going to be when these spikes are completely done and we have no more spikes. That's vegetative time. Is typically going to be December, January, February. And then as the daylight hours begin to flip toward between Mother's Day and Easter Mother's Day window there, that's when we want to see our new spike beginning to grow up and beginning to set bud. And usually that'll open sometime in June. You'll see those buds start to open. That's telling you it's a happy plant. Try distilled water, try rainwater, please no water from the tap. And again, if you just want to refresh it, a year and a half is pretty good time for it to be in bark and then get that refreshed. If you have any questions on pots, any questions on the orchids, we bring them in from a specialty grower in Hawaii, and we bring in some awesome species. Or if you just need an idea on what type of blend you need to get, we can help you out with that. So please let us know. We'd be glad to help you.